Welcome back to A Shark's Perspective. Here's a chicken and egg story for most businesses today. Which came first, the problem or the solution? How do you go about solving problems for your customers? It's often that people and businesses jump to their solution, but is your thinking focused on designing something that would actually creatively solve a problem to benefit the end user? Are you looking at creative problem solving with a human-centered core? Are you asking the right questions? Mark Rickmeier is the CEO at TableXI, a UX research, design, and software development company, and the co-founder of Walkshop, a hiking and leadership development experience for executives. And on this episode, we'll discuss design thinking, how to do it and get others to think that way, hiring future design thinkers, Tyson Chicken, Roger Ebert, working with Neil Patel, walking in Scotland and Tuscany, and a lot more. So let's tune in to a design thinker with a designer shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. All right, Mark, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective. So if you would, tell us a little bit about your background and your career to date.
So let's see, my name is Mark Rickmeier. I'm the CEO at TableXI. TableXI is a software design development company in Chicago. So we build all kinds of custom software for clients in the States. We have clients in Tokyo and London, Singapore. So we've gotten quite a bit of reach at this rate. And people call us when they need some kind of custom technology that will help them create a new opportunity for their business. Sometimes it's like a mobile app or a chatbot. Sometimes it's a web application. But I think the thing I get excited about is that it allows me to be a builder. I like making things, but I get to be really creative and make things that are really custom for them and have something that has not been done before. So I think it's nice to be able to have that inner child in me that loves playing with Legos. Like I still get to make things, but I get to do things in a really creative way.
So what was your background prior to TableXI?
So it's fun. So academically, I was econ. I was finance and accounting. Nice. And I used to go to class and then come home and put on my little suit and tie and go down to Solomon Smith Barney and learn how to be a trader. And I freaking hated it.
Yeah.
It was so miserable. And so I got just so lucky, cosmically lucky. I graduated at the height of the dot-com boom.
Yeah.
When technology could do no wrong and people were hiring anyone that could spell Java. And my sales pitch was, I don't know a lot, but I can learn real fast. And I got a miraculous job where I couldn't write software. So they're like, okay, well, you're not a software developer, and you have no practical business experience, so you can't be an analyst. You can't tell us what it's supposed to do. Can you break stuff? Like maybe you can be a QA tester and like out things to developers and maybe find bugs in the system.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, yeah, I can do that. I can totally do that. And so I got my foot in the door in QA, trying to learn how to outthink the developers and find bugs in the system. And that's how I got my start in technology about 20 years ago.
And you were a Northwestern grad
Mm-hmm.
in IT. That doesn't sound right, though. That doesn't seem to mix. Even at the time, I don't think of Northwestern as like a premier IT coding school.
And they have. Actually, there was a really good
amazing school
program, but
yeah.
I just wasn't in it. I was all econ, finance. Like that's what I mean. Northwestern's really known for marketing,
exactly,
really
journalism.
And so, yeah, I was kind of
medicine.
I was deep in that track, and it was in my senior year, and the last semester when I started, I took my very first computer science class, and I realized I just missed the boat. I think I had been taking the wrong classes, and I was so sad that I missed this thing that I got so excited about that I started applying to these companies, and that was my sales pitch. I was like, I'm going to learn faster than anybody, and I'm really dedicated to this. And so one company, a company called ThoughtWorks in Chicago, I don't know why they did it, but they took the risk, and I haven't looked back since.
So the topic of the day is design thinking.
Mm-hmm.
In your mind, kind of describe, especially for the marketer's mind, what design thinking is.
So design thinking, it's unfortunately one of those words like innovation that just kind of thrown out, right? And I'm not sure everyone understands it. So for me, design thinking it's a way of looking at a problem and a way of solving a problem. And so one of the things that I'm doing, like an introduction to design thinking talk, or I did a master class here in Chicago at the GoTo conference, and the first thing I ask people to do is to draw the person next to them. I learned this technique actually from a Northwestern professor who teaches design. and everyone gets all freaked out. It's very fun because they start. No one can draw terribly well, and they're all trying to like sketch the person next to them. And then we actually have them trade drawings and introduce each other, which always starts with like, "I'm sorry," or like, I don't mean to offend you."
Right.
Like, and I do that not just to break the ice, but to draw the point home that design thinking has very little to do with designing. Like, as an artist, you're not there to sketch and to draw. That's not what it's about. So you don't have to be a classically trained visual designer, graphic designer. That's not design thinking. The way design thinking works is it's how you think about a problem and trying to do it from a user's perspective. And so after that, I'll do a different kind of a challenge. I'll ask them to draw. I learned this from a friend of mine named Jessie Sternshoes. She runs a company called the Improv Effect. And so she'll sit down with people and say, "I want you to draw a vase." And that's, people relieve, they breathe a little bit easier. That's easier than drawing someone's face.
Mm-hmm.
And we compare drawings, and everyone pretty much has, some people have better art than others, but they're all basically the same. And then she would give them a challenge that said, draw 3 ways of holding flowers. And then after about 60 seconds, she'll say, draw 3 more ways of holding flowers. And then you start comparing results. And of course, people come up with all kinds of crazy things. Flowers in little water guns, flowers behind the ears, flowers that people weave into wreaths. And we ask, what was the difference between that and the first time when everyone just drew a vase? And people come up with different answers, but eventually someone realizes, like, well, the first time you gave us the solution, a vase is how I'm going to hold flowers. The second time you gave me the problem, and I was able to explore it a little bit. One of the best things about design thinking is that you don't start with the solution. You're not trying to come in with a pre-proposed solution and say, here's how we're going to do something. You really try to understand the nature of the problem first. That's, I think, one of the most important lessons that people have to learn as they start exploring what design thinking is to back away from the CEO or the executive or the product owner and say, like, hey, we need to do this thing. It's having the courage to step back and say, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And let's learn a little bit more about the users it's affecting, and then we can get into what a solution might look like. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. So how do most people process this? What type of thinking are most people applying? Is there a name that we can associate with it as an alternative to design? Is it strictly agile? What are the types of terms that we think of?
Agile is a different way of thinking. We use that a lot as well.
Sure.
But I would categorize them a bit differently. So in Agile, you're trying to take a very complex problem and work on it iteratively, break them into small steps,
Mm-hmm.
work on things incrementally, get rapid feedback. And so in the software world, if you're doing a lot of work in Agile, which is what we do, you're trying to build the thing right. So you're thinking about, how do I take something and make it work well that I can get working software out of it? Design thinking is more like, how do I build the right thing?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're trying to better understand the nature of the problem before you get into the solution. And so the very first thing you would do in design thinking would be to learn more about your users, not starting to talk about the solution. And that happens, it's very important. So like when someone comes to you and says like, hey, we need to build a mobile app, the first thing you should say is, why? Don't tell me about this, because if you were thinking like in an agile mindset, you'd say, great. Tell me about that mobile app. I'll break it into stories. I'll estimate those stories. I'll build an iteration schedule based on that. But when you leave with design thinking, you'd say, why? Tell me about the users. What problem are we trying to solve? You don't want to draw the vase. You want to ask, how else might I hold flowers? So you want to first start learning more about the users and then synthesize that into what the core problem statement is going to be. And so when you start leaning in design thinking ways of working, you find ways to do user research. You get in the minds of users. You visit them in their homes. You try to get a sense of what's going on. So you're not operating from a set of assumptions or a set of preconceived notions or what the boss tells you. You're getting the real insights from the people who you're going to be affecting.
So I think a lot of times we think always about the website when thinking about this, but this obviously applies to any type of tech that we work with a user. But whether we're designing a mobile app or a website redesign or a landing page or email or whatever it is,
it doesn't even have to be technology.
Well, absolutely, just something that you are delivering though to a customer, something that's going to interface with that customer. For the most part, It's to me, it's always been very easy to think of this from a solo perspective. I coded, I've designed a lot of websites and products and things like that myself, and I've done that kind of design. But it's very easy in yourself to get isolated and be able to think that way if that's part of your mental strategy for design. Bigger picture though, how do you get a group of people who maybe aren't all aligned to think that way, to think collectively about the user first?
It's important, and I think you want that diverse perspective. It's great to get different people in the room who think differently, designers, developers, that kind of thing. But the way that we do that is, we go through this process we call the double diamond process, and it's drawn like a diamond. If you can picture that at the beginning, you start moving apart. It's called divergent thinking, and so you try to get as much insight as you can, rather than relying on your own assumptions. That's where we talk about user research and ethnographies and getting a sense of what's going on with real people. And then at the tip of that diamond, you converge back down and say, okay, what did we hear? What are the unique insights we got? And you try to come up with a real problem statement, something you think you can solve. But you're always trying to understand the nature of the problem before you get into a solution. And it's once you finally get everyone understanding, like, this is the actual problem we're solving, that's when you get into the second diamond, you diverge again. And now in this divergent thinking, you're asking a different kind of question. Now you're asking, how might we solve this? And that's where you start seeing people prototype and draw and sketch and say, here's how we might go about the solution. And that's where you want divergent thinking. You don't want groupthink. You don't want everyone designing in a group. You want people to explore ideas. And
Absolutely.
then you take and you converge back down onto something. So there's room for, I would say, diverse opinions and diverse thought. It's actually way better, frankly, when you have diverse thought in this kind of process. But there's a time and place for each kind of activity, which is why we describe it as that double diamond metaphor, because you want both divergent and convergent thinking throughout the process.
It just seems so elementary that people should think of the customer first, but so rarely do people do it.
Oh my gosh. So like a great example, someone called us and said, hey, we need an app. And that happens all the time, right? Someone's
Sure.
like, hey, I need to build an app for this. And that's hard because, I come from a software background, and the people pleaser in me, the agile part of me, wants to say, like, yeah, of course. Tell me about this app. I'm great at building apps. And it was hard. We had to push back and say, well, no, tell me about the user you're trying to solve this need for. And in this case, it was a large research university that was trying to find a way to connect to their students. They were trying to think about how the administration could build a connection with them and how the students could learn more about their 4 years, frankly, to avoid the mistakes I made by picking the wrong path. And that was great. That was a user we could empathize with. So we said, let's, just spend 5 days. We'll fly down, we'll talk to students. And on the 5th day, we came back with our prototypes and said, no, you don't. You want a chatbot. You're on the wrong path entirely. Mm-hmm. We can totally build this app you're talking about, but students don't want to download something on their phone and take up the screen real estate for something they use like once or twice a year. They want it real time. They don't have to go to the App Store and download it. They want real time access. And so they want a chatbot. And the administration was so relieved because I think they would have spent $250,000 building a mobile app that nobody wanted. And I think this introducing this design thinking process allowed them to be able to rapidly prototype and validate ideas. And just by having that little bit of user empathy, they built a way better chatbot, which, by the way, is like cheaper to build and easier to design, easier to deploy. It saved them a tremendous amount of money, but made their students happier. It's what the students needed. So they got what they needed, not what they asked for initially. And that's one of the things that design thinking helps to encourage, is not taking the assumptions of the person who's ordering the project, but talking to the users it's going to affect and getting their input.
Help us with giving sort of a practical example with a client where you've done this as well. Sort of walk us through the start to finish of the process.
Yeah, and as we were talking about how design thinking can be used in software,
right?
And that's, I would say, how the majority of my practical application of this facilitation and thinking technique is how it's used. We design mobile applications and web applications. But Tyson came to us with a very different kind of idea. In their case, they were trying to think about how, in one case, how they could reduce food waste. Very large concept, big problem. Another, a very forward-thinking for a protein company, was how do we start thinking about products that don't have protein? Like, you think of Tyson as a chicken nugget company, so for them to have a proteinless concept was a very forward-thinking thing. And so you have these big problems, like food waste or like sustainable foods that are really interesting. And so they came to us not because they wanted to build a mobile app. They just wanted to have their people learn this way of thinking. So we came in and started thinking about, well, how could we use these same design thinking techniques? And so the first thing we did is go talk to users. And that was really interesting because you talk to people about their shopping behavior, and they would say, "Oh, I'm always organic, and I, always eat the nicest things, and I always get the healthiest things." And then you go do some ethnographies, and you visit them in your home, and it's like a bunch of Campbell soup and like Twix bars, and like it's not an all
Right, right.
So you really got to think about, how do I really understand these users, their shopping behaviors, their buying behaviors, and then when we started talking to them and getting a sense of their diet and their health and how they think about food, that's when you start consolidating down to here's how they think about food and how we could, maybe solve some of these issues with food waste. And that's when you start prototyping and you think about the leftover ingredients that are, left over from different kinds of manufacturing processes. And Tyson's not the only one. There are leftover ingredients that Miller Coors has, in the brewing process. And so we started reaching out to other partners in the community and said, what could we do if we were to take some of these leftover forgotten ingredients and reuse them? Mm-hmm. And so the prototyping that we did with Tyson was, not on an app, but with a Michelin star chef in a kitchen and trying to think about what could we come up with. And we came up with dozens of ideas. And what's nice is that you're not trying to launch something to market, right? Like in design thinking, you're trying to say, how can I scale quickly? You're trying to get a prototype out there and test it with it. So what Tyson did was, we're not going to go launch this product in 60 million stores. We're going to put it on Indiegogo and see if any users are interested. And then we're going to put it on Kickstarter and see if any more users are interested. And they got a tremendous outpouring of support. And then they started thinking about how can we start testing this in small markets. And so this concept, which started off with how do we solve the problem of food waste, went into users' homes and understanding how they think about food, to prototyping concepts, to testing them, and getting rapid feedback in these ways. And when it launched, it got Time Magazine's, I think it was most sustainable products in 2018, an incredible innovation in the food space. So that's what I like about this, is because it's just a way of thinking. It's just a way of problem solving. And I use it to solve problems with technology. I use it to design software. But the same process can be applied. And so I don't know if you've heard about, a lot of the protein list opportunities. So for Tyson, it's called Raised and Rooted. Mm-hmm. They created a whole new product that was one of the items of our design sprints together, was this Raised and Rooted product, which is a totally new kind of product for Tyson. And so you have this, large multi-billion-dollar organization applying these same techniques to totally disrupt and change your industry. It's really neat.
So a lot of times, a company, especially the marketing team who may lead this with the IT team behind them, but so often the marketing team may push for a product or service or something that we need you, a firm, to build. When that happens and they've got that set expectation of what they have in their mind they need to get built, is that a majority of the time, or do you find that most of the teams you work with are open-minded to seeing where this rabbit hole goes? Because I would imagine that as you uncover problems that you don't necessarily expect, or maybe not solutions, you uncover solutions, sure, it goes down a different path than what a lot of teams initially expected, and then it may give the end user a product that they needed rather than necessarily what they thought. And so that what they thought they needed, and then the complaint comes back, they didn't design what we wanted, but that's not necessarily what they needed.
Yeah. I think that happens to us, fairly often.
Sure.
So, people come to us with, generally it's one of three questions someone would call me with. And after 17 years, it's not always the case, but it's almost always one of these three questions.
Sure.
So the first is we've built something, but it's not working terribly well. It's not scaling. There's performance problems, security vulnerabilities. Can you help us do some kind of code audit? What's going wrong under the hood? But the other two are something different. It's not, they don't have an existing thing. It's more like they want to build something. And in some case, you've got them saying, I think this is a good idea, but I want to learn more about what it could be. I want to figure that out. So that's where we go through that process of trying to rapidly prototype and evaluate the needs of the users to help them come up with the concept. In other cases, they're fairly sure they've got the right concept, but they're asking about different kinds of things, more project constraints, like time. How long will this take? How much will it cost? What are the risks involved? And there's a different facilitation technique. That's where you get more into the agile way of thinking, of breaking down a concept and working it into pieces. But I always have to, I have to ask, how do you know this is the right idea? Have you had a chance to validate anything?
Yeah, how do you test it? I mean,
yeah, because software is expensive.
exactly.
Like, honestly, it's how I put bread on the table. But custom software is expensive. To hire a dev team for 3 to 5 months, if that's how you're figuring out by shipping something, what's called an MVP, or minimum viable product, if you're going to find out successful because you ship something, an agile, you can ship it in months, not years. And so I still love the agile process. But if that's how you're finding out what success looks like, that's crazy. That's very expensive. I would much rather do a quick test and get something right or wrong on paper, or with users in a week, than to ship something in 12 weeks and find out, man, no one wanted that mobile app. I needed a chatbot. I'm on the wrong path. So even when someone is fairly sure that this is what they want, you have to ask the question, how can you be so sure? What have you done to validate that? And is there any way that you've done and explored some element of validation in user research? The idea of failure sometimes is so abhorrent, and you see this especially at large companies, that you have to kind of break them of that fear and say, you want to fail. You just want to fail quickly. You don't want to fail months later when you ship something to production. You want to learn very quickly that you're on the right or wrong path. So design thinking doesn't try to prevent failure from happening. In fact, it's great when you can find something that's a bad idea because you can kill it quickly. Some of the best projects are the ones we stop 5 days into it because we know it's not going to work.
Exactly.
That's a different mindset shift, especially for people sometimes in marketing or product where they feel like they have to launch a success. A lot of company cultures, man, they're so afraid of failure they can't even talk about it. And there's no design sprint process in the world will guarantee success. All it will guarantee is that you'll find out quickly if you're on the right or wrong path. And trying to fail quickly is not a bad thing.
So for a team that's starting to look into a product or service or whatever it is that they're wanting to build and engage you with to help build out a product or some sort of technical solution, what are the types of things that they should ask themselves to get that process started before they come to you?
I think the first thing I would always ask is, what's the real problem we're trying to solve? And make sure there's just crystal clarity on that, that everyone understands the nature of the problem, not just the proposed solution.
Do you find that they do know that? Are they asking enough questions internally before they've gotten to you?
Sometimes no, but sometimes they also have a hard time understanding that. And it's because they're kind of, this happens a lot, but people navel gaze and they think internally, what's the problem we're trying to solve?
Yeah.
And you got to really encourage them, like, go talk to your customers. Don't solve the problem you think. Talk to the people that are going to be using the thing. So I think that's the first thing I would say is just make sure you really understand the nature of what the problem is before you lead the solution. And then really try to understand what is very often as people are trying to hire a software design company or development company like me, they're really focused on the cost. How long is this thing going to take? How much are you going to cost me? And listen, I get it. That's very important. But I think you have to also be thinking about what's the benefit of this? What's the value I'm going to be able to create by doing this? Is this ROI positive?
Absolutely.
And I think the value sometimes is something that doesn't get enough focus, never measured as much as the cost side. And so I think early on, you don't want to be that annoying person, but we asked so many questions early on to make sure that they really have done their homework and talked to users and they really understand what they're asking about. And they've really tried to quantify the benefits. Because as I said, software can be expensive. Custom software is not cheap. And you want to make sure they really have thought about the benefit, the value they're going to be unlocking, that there's a real, a good business case for it.
Well, I was glad to hear you say that because I started out in MarTech and I even worked with clients way back then. I never saw anybody ask enough questions. And I always sort of came up with my own little 80-20 rule is that, it was to them, they thought that the problem they understood was 80% and that the solution was 20% on how to fix it. And it wasn't at all. It was just the opposite of that. They had not asked nearly enough questions. And then when they get billed for 80% later, it's because they found out stuff they should have asked.
They should have known,
and then they blame the agency, unfortunately, too often, or they blame the firm building it because they didn't ask the right kind of questions. And it's not a fault of the developer, for example. A lot of times it just comes down to either a fault of the communication by the company to firms like yours, or they just didn't ask enough questions.
I think we have that kind of moral responsibility to ask those
exactly.
questions. So honestly, very early on, I have to apologize and say, like, you're
Yeah.
probably going to be sick of me.
Yeah.
But like, I have to ask why a lot. Because, going back to that example, if we had not asked why, we would have built a really great mobile app that no students would have wanted. And
Exactly.
they would have been upset. Like, if you launched an app and it was a total flop, so I think you have to, when they say we want to build a mobile app, my first question has got to be why? Like, why would you want to do that? Tell me more about the users you're trying to solve, and why do you know that those are the right users? What if do you have any insights that tells me about how they're actually feeling? So I think what's nice is that I'm seeing this across the board. People obviously in e-commerce have been thinking about the user experience, the shopping
Mm-hmm.
experience for a while. But even in healthcare, I think people are really now starting to think about what is the actual patient experience
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
and going from just big systems integrations projects and difficult, complex, EMR projects to really trying to understand the nature of the patient experience and to design for it. People are realizing that level of empathy makes a huge difference in terms of the product's eventual success. And so this kind of user research, I would say, was a lot harder to really promote. And I was always an obnoxious guy, always pushing for why. And now I think people really understand the value of talking to the user
Mm-hmm.
and empathy with the user. And frankly, I think what they're looking for is help, because it's not a skill set that a lot of people, understand and have. User research has every bit as much discipline and rigor as the software development. How you ask questions so you don't lead the user on, how you can gain rich insights is every bit as disciplined as is, I would say, the software development team. So I think people are understanding the nature of user experience in the user journey way more than they did, say, 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
Even slow-moving large hospital systems and things, like I said, are starting to think about the patient experience. And we're seeing that makes my job easier, so that I'm not this obnoxious guy asking questions, but they see it as part of a process to help them understand the value of design thinking.
It's a competitive advantage, and if you don't understand it as that way, it can really affect your business. So, do you find that the companies that are really succeeding at this, or when that know how to engage and build out the right products and design things correctly, do you find that it's more of a company-based approach, or is it more of an industry-based approach? And the basis for that question is you just mentioned something about healthcare. There are a lot of forces behind healthcare that push people design not necessarily cookie cutter type projects, but projects similar in nature. And I don't know if healthcare is necessarily the best example, but something like HIPAA and all the different types of forces behind healthcare is going to push certain things, certain waves in design the same way, if that makes sense.
Yep. I would say there are certainly industry forces whenever there is a very tight coupling between the user journey, the user experience, and revenue. So like e-commerce has been knowing about the value of user experience for a very long time. And I don't see that as much in, like, say, manufacturing systems, or like sometimes even in healthcare. But I find that you would not have naturally thought design thinking changing snack food design, and so this is why this kind of courageous executive, or someone who understands the value of understanding of the user and really pushes for rapid prototyping. And I think more importantly, doesn't just accept, but endorses and celebrates the occasional failure. That's the kind of executive that can push for this kind of change. And so that's where I'm looking for when we talk to clients. It's one of the things I try to understand pretty quickly about their internal company is like how is that mindset from the executive level down? Is this something that they're going to encourage? Like, for example, when I get in front of my employees every 3 months, we have an all hands. We get all together, and I will get up and say, these are the 3 biggest mistakes I've made since the last time we got together. These are the biggest failures I've made. My failures cost us way more than anybody else does. And if I can be honest about that, I just want to make the same mistakes more than once, but I can be honest about these are the mistakes I made. So I want people to, have that mindset of experimentation, and it's okay to make a mistake and rebound from it. So I think even though there are some industries that maybe aren't as far along as others, it's the courageous executive that will embrace and understand the need for failure in the innovation process, and that will encourage this style of design thinking that you can get more creative output. That's the kind of people that I think can really push forward, a company, even one as large, and you would think typically you associate large with slow moving, but like take someone like Tyson that's just leapfrogging in the industry because this is their way of solving problems. I love it. So I don't think it's entirely industry focused. Like I said, certain industries maybe have gotten excited about these notions, a decade earlier. but I think there's a lot of people focusing on the user, and I think there are brave executives that are really making this push for cultural change internally about how you make decisions, around how you understand and recognize that innovation only happens with risk-taking and with failure. That's where you start seeing it really adopt.
So you've seen a lot of brave executives at Tyson who aren't chicken.
I love that.
Yeah, it's like dad jokes, yeah, on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
So
You should have a whole podcast just for dad jokes.
just for dad jokes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you've worked with some smart executives as well, though. What was working with Neil Patel like?
Oh, he's got so much going on. So we've had a chance to work with some, I would say, like serial entrepreneurs, like people that
Exactly.
are one person wrecking through an industry, and so that's where we have. I think my favorite was actually was Roger Ebert, because he was a professional film critic. The man criticized for a living.
Yeah.
So you talk about software design. His 1-star reviews way more entertaining than his 5-star reviews. And so we got it both barrels full in the face a couple times as we were designing his site and getting feedback from Roger. The challenge, I think, when you're working with someone with like Neil, who does so much and works in so many different areas, is trying to get that few 5 minutes with him to get feedback when you need it. And so, every time we work with a client, you've got to find that cadence, that pattern of work.
Mm-hmm.
There's a brilliant guy named Mark Rickmeier. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's an architect in Japan. But he created something called the Pachakacha movement. It stands for chit chat in Japanese. It is a way of telling stories. So rather than people prattling on kind of like I'm doing right now, you get exactly 400 seconds to tell a story. And in that 400 seconds, you get only 20 images. And whether you are ready or not, those
Mm-hmm.
images automatically advance to the next one every 20 seconds. So it's exactly 400 seconds, 20 slides, 20 seconds per slide. And only an image, so no, slide you mince with tons of text and bullets. You really got to own your narrative. This started in Tokyo, and now it's in over 1,000 cities worldwide. There's
Wow.
this whole platform for these Pachakacha style talks. And so he came all the way to Chicago to meet with us to build out the web platform for Pachakacha. It's like a series of TED Talks online. You
Mm-hmm.
can see all these different talks and see the cities. And that guy is brilliant. And it's amazing to hear some kind of gifted storyteller like him come in and teach your company how to do Pachakacha style.
Yeah,
talks.
really.
It's really neat. So we're lucky. We get to work with some pretty crazy smart people. And then the question is, how do you make your availability match their availability
Sure.
when they're as busy as those people are?
Well, hiring, whether it's marketing, IT, anything, with any good skill, it's pretty tough right now. And I know you guys have been recognized as a top employer in the Chicagoland area, but how do you hire the right kind of talent who can help adopt a design thinking mentality? Or is there a trait that you're looking for in their style of learning that will help them adopt a design thinking?
There is, and I get to humble brag just for a second. We got that Inc. Award, not just in Chicago, but the entire country is one of the best places to work. I'm insanely proud of that. So one of the things that we do is actually get them to play in the interview process. So like you've hired people before, when you're interviewing people, they always have their action. Everyone's practiced and rehearsed.
Mm-hmm.
They know just what to say. And we find that when people play, their real personalities come out. And so one of my favorite things to do is I'll dump a whole bunch of Legos on a table, and I'll be like, great, help me design. I want to design the perfect office space. And I got all these requirements. I want you to facilitate me to gather the requirements from me and then start building this office space. And I'll do things like change my mind and change priorities and see how they react to that change. But when they're playing with Lego and interacting, we bring another developer who's also playing in Lego. So they're not writing code. They're building in Lego, not Ruby on Rails or Python or something.
Mm-hmm.
And they're working in these quick 5-minute iterations, not 2-week iterations. But their real personalities come out. And that has been such an interesting way to see how people react in the interview process. We do it with our clients now.
Mm-hmm.
So when clients start working with us, we make them play in Lego. And I will be the person to change requirements and see how they react when the pressure is tight or when they run out of resources and things. So we try to find a way to get to know the real human in the interview process, because you want someone that is capable of communicating, someone who's capable of creative thought, but I think in a huge way for us, capable of collaboration. Software is a social practice, so we want people that are understanding and enjoying of that part of it and can work with other humans. And so I think the best thing we found out, and that is that ability to introduce play into the recruiting process, you get to know the real people. And we actually had one client that we did not work with, thank God, but in the Lego exercise, two of them were just going at it, cats and dogs. And up until that point, it was like united front, and they were talking about their business and how much they were going to raise. And then, my God, they just lit into each other when they were trying to play with Legos. And sure enough, 3 months later, lawsuit, two of them totally just going to like tearing each other apart in the court. And you could see it coming. The writing was on the wall. But when they were pitching, it was beautiful pitch deck, and they totally rehearsed. So one of the things we try to do is introduce a little bit of a play into the process to get a sense of what people are like, and just try to see what the real person's all about. That's on the evaluation side. I think there's a different thing we try to do during the onboarding process to make them successful. But I know, again, in a tight labor market, it's very difficult, and I think there's this temptation to just hire someone you think is good enough, and like you really got to know, right? You really want to get to know the person.
Oh,
well.
absolutely.
So whatever techniques you can use, like even if you don't play with Lego, whatever techniques you can use to get to know a person, I highly recommend.
So once you've got them together, how do you help develop them? I mean, what do you do outside of just the normal day-to-day work to help develop that mindset?
There's a process that we actually came up with called the sticky note game. I don't know if you've heard about that, but it's a way that we try to encourage people to grow their own skills. And so the way that you facilitate this is, I think a company has their own expectations of what success looks like for a person. And of course, people have their own ideas of what they want to do to be successful. And I think the biggest challenge we frequently find in onboarding, especially high talented people do it wrong. Sometimes people assume onboarding is, I'm going to tell them all about the company history. And so they know where they understand where we've been. And that's good, but that's not the most important. Other times they really want to instill a sense of belonging. So they'll give them like the company t-shirt and a company swag and try to have like a big welcome party.
Right.
And that's great too. But that's not onboarding either. The single most important factor in onboarding, especially with like top tier talent, is expectation setting, and that they know what success really looks like. So when we try to take someone who's really creative and try to think about how do we, foster their skills and encourage their path, we play this game called the sticky note game. And so we start a meeting in complete silence, and I ask you, think about where you're going to be 6 months from now, and I want you to look back and say, I just crushed it. Oh man, that was so successful. And we take about 5 minutes where you write things down on sticky notes in one color, and I'm the employer, so I write in a different color. And I have another person with me who may be like your peer or someone else who's kind of at your level, and then they're the same color as me. So we have three people, two different colors, all writing what we think success looks like. And then we start putting them up on the board. And so I might put something up there like, hey, you gave that great talk at the GoTo conference all about design thinking. And the new hire is like, wait, you want me to do public speaking? That's a thing that you expect? I did not know that's an expectation. And they might say, I ran the Chicago Marathon, and I was able to get to my running group on time, and I was able to be out of here at 4 o'clock. I'm like, oh, that's great. You probably shouldn't be on the Neil Patel project because he doesn't work and stop at 4 o'clock. So having that very clear set of expectations has a huge impact for what we find deliver success for these really creative and driven people, that they know exactly what that looks like, and they have the expectations set by the employer, and we get to hear back from them. What's nice is when I get this, I get to digitize it, step back and look at my entire team and say, 30 of them want to learn how to do facilitation, 20 want to learn JavaScript, 5 want to get better at public speaking. And then I get to see all those and encourage a group of them to learn together. So I think this works really well. I've been trying a different technique for my own CEO kind of path in learning, because I don't have as a CEO, I don't have the same level of peers that developers do. But we found that the sticky note game has been a really valuable way to encourage that growth in people. So we actually wrote it all up. You can go to stickynote.game and get like the cheat sheet on how to facilitate it and how to run it. It's been now there are dozens of companies who now run this process internally.
But you also take them on a hiking leadership development for some people as you develop your own CEO skills as well.
That's something. So I've been trying that for myself a couple of years ago. I took on that CEO role 2 years ago, and my cards on the table. I'd never been a CEO before. I still, frankly, don't know what I'm doing, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to be the best CEO I can be. And so I invited 9 other CEOs to go on this trip with me, where we go on a long distance hike. In this case, the first year we planned it through Scotland. And talking about design thinking, I want to learn from the people who do this. Like, tell me about your jobs. How do you do it well? And so I wanted to know, like, what are my
Yeah.
first 100 days going to be like? You know, how do I do this job well? What problems have you found? And what was interesting is we didn't talk about marketing or sales. We talked about, as we were hiking through Scotland, it was like, how do you handle the stress? You've got kids. How do you handle the work-life balance?
Exactly.
We're all on boards. Like, how do you handle the philanthropic side of your life with the work side of your life? That was such a valuable week where, you know, no one was on Slack, no Twitter interruptions, no meetings. I didn't have to run out to send invoices. Like, I just had 5 days, and I am not in shape, as you can see. So, like, I had a service that would carry our bags.
Yeah.
So we'd go for this long hike through the woods, and, like, our bags would just show up for us at the next bed and breakfast.
And then you left them in the woods in Scotland and never saw them again.
Yeah, and then I slowly took over all
exactly.
the firms.
Yeah, exactly.
How I do.
Master plan.
People into the woods of Scotland, and yeah, that's my global domination strategy. But yeah, we're heading to Tuscany next week. I've done this now 3 years, where we invite executives, and it's expanded to entrepreneurs and some designers, and there's a whole bunch of creative people that are trying to get out from behind a desk. You know, like get some dedicated time with some really smart people and learn from them in a way that you don't when you're, you know, sitting down all the time.
Well, Mark, you live in Chicago, and there aren't a lot of them up there, other than unless you go to Shedd Aquarium and see one. But I've got to ask, what is your favorite kind of shark and why?
My favorite kind of shark? I will tell you, it's not the baby shark that my daughter keeps playing. It's making me nuts.
That probably just made him another $1 right there, just saying it on this.
Yeah, just right there. My favorite shark is going to be the animated great white sharks from Finding Nemo.
Bruce,
Yeah, Bruce. I love that movie. I just got a chance to rewatch it with my kids. It's easily my favorite Pixar movie. And I do not have a death wish. I go strolling through Tuscany as you go diving with sharks. I'm not nearly as adventurous as you.
Yeah, but sadly, I've got a big poster of Bruce here in this room. So.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Yeah, Bruce. I would say of my favorite sharks, I'm going to go with animated Pixar sharks. Are nice and safe and hysterical. They're my favorite.
Well, Mark, it's that special time in the show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions you're going to be asked today?
Hit me.
All right. Number 1, somewhat related to the Tyson chicken story. KFC or Popeyes?
Oh, man.
I'm sure they buy chicken from both.
I think I have to go Popeyes. I think this came up in Trivial Pursuit recently. It's like, what company reintroduced their food in bucket form in the 90s? And I was like, I'm a big fan of having dinner in buckets. So yes, I'm gonna go Popeyes. All
right, number 2, as part of your Northwestern to where you are today, education, econ or IT?
Oh, I have to say IT. I was a terrible econ student, and I'm glad for the background it gave me, but yeah, I'm going to go IT. I really wish I had done more computer software a long time ago.
All right. Number 3, as a builder, you'll appreciate this, the Lego Ninjago movie or the Lego Batman movie?
Oh, man. Lego Batman.
Yeah, you got to. Will Arnett, come on.
Like, I'm like, because I'm Batman. Yeah, you have to pick Batman. Will Arnett's amazing.
He is indeed. So number 4, hiking or leadership development?
I'm going to cheat and say yes.
Well, it's on walkshop.io's website, so it's a multi-day hiking and leadership development. So, which is it? Which is more important to you personally, hiking or leadership development?
I like not sitting at my desk all day.
There you go.
And I get more ideas when I'm on my feet.
Yeah.
I'm going to say I get lots of opportunities to do leadership development in different forms. I really like having the opportunity while I'm hiking.
Absolutely.
I need fun.
Yeah, if you're going to ask me, swimming or marketing, I'm going with swimming any day of the week. So.
Yeah, I think I have to go hiking.
Yeah, and number 5, and the most important question that you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Cornbread, easily cornbread.
All right.
I'm a huge cornbread fan.
Well, you're in Illinois. I mean, it's all they've got is corn and like 3 people, so, and a few skyscrapers.
Corn and bread, like that's what we do. But yeah, I'm a huge cornbread fan. My kids won't even let me eat it. They're big cornbread fans.
Nice. Mark, where can people find out more about you, keep up with your thoughts, and do a walkabout with you if you're not back in Australia?
Yeah.
or Tuscany or somewhere. So
somewhere out in the world. So you can find out about our company at tablexi.com. I write and publish pretty frequently on LinkedIn. And if you're ever curious about these global hikes that we do with other executives and designers and folks, that's called a walkshop, not a workshop, because we're creative like that. So a walkshop, and you can find that out at walkshop.io.
Definitely, I'll add the link. So, Mark, thank you so much for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Thanks so much.
So there was my conversation with Mark Rickmeier, the CEO at TableXI, a UX research, design, and software development company, and the co-founder of Walkshop, a hiking and leadership development experience for executives. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, how do you creatively solve problems by applying design thinking? Well, you don't start with what you think is the solution. As Mark said, one of the best things about design thinking is that you don't start with a solution. You're not trying to come in with a pre-proposed solution and say, here's how we're going to do something. You really try to understand the nature of the problem first. And I cannot emphasize this enough that it should be a lesson for the C-suite or any management team. There is nothing wrong with asking why or questioning it. It's a brave executive and a brave agency who questions senior leadership or a brand's team with asking more questions to truly understand the problem that you're actually trying to solve. Oversimplification, of course, but a lot of upper management teams see a round hole in their square peg and then try to push that through to the consumer. Sometimes the brave leader is simply someone who asks, why? Why not use a round peg instead? Most businesses understand their solutions all too well, but it's a good thing, no, a great thing, when someone challenges you with asking more why questions to see if that's actually the customer's problem. Second, how do you get a group of people to think like this? To start, don't rely on your own assumptions. Mark uses something like a double diamond approach. As he said, you want divergent and convergent thinking. Push back and let others do the same instead of automatically agreeing on building something. Ask why. Learn about the user's problems. You may come up with a different solution. You may get what you need instead of what you were asking for. Third, quantify the benefit. Understand the value before jumping into a solution that can be pricey, especially for tech, if you miss it. Ask as many questions as possible first. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. So let's design a better day, a better way to solve problems, and let's design more time for you to join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.